Yeah, folks, somehow we survived an entire weekend without any new Hearthstone cards, but the wait is over. It's time for another Cataclysm card review. Today we've got big time Mage Legendary, you'll see here behind me, some other Mage cards, and I think some pretty good Hunter cards as well. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Kicking it off here with Archmage Calic. This is a 4-mana 4/4 with Battle Cry. Give all spells in your hand and deck spell damage +1, and I think that's a really nice powerful effect. Basically going to sometimes give you extra lethality, a little bit of spell damage here and there can certainly add up to some lethal pushes, but also, you know, little removal spells and stuff can get some extra payoffs. We even have cards in standard format that do benefit from this kind of doubly because they have multiple numbers on the card. So, you know, Arcane Barrage now would say deal 4 damage to an enemy and 3 damage to 2 other random ones. So you're able to sometimes multiply that spell damage even further across certain types of cards. And we're going to actually see another example of that here in this video with another new card. So Mage has some cards that can certainly pay this off, both just raw damage output and also, you know, little removal and stuff to help you keep up. I think 4 mana is a nice sweet spot here for Calic, where it's not so expensive that you feel like it's happening too late in the game. If this were like a 6 or 7 mana card or something, it might just be coming down too late and like you just don't have time to weave that in. 4 mana 4/4, you can still weave that in sometimes. Just get that going on turn 4. You have that kind of mid-game stretch, turn 5, 6, 7 or whatever, to start paying this off, and then, you know, eventually maybe setting up for those big bursts or whatever down the road. But you know, 4 is probably just fast enough. You'd be even more excited if this were 3, but I would be nervous if this were 5. So I think it's going to be fine. You know, we've had metas, you play the Elise, you play the Xavius, you know, whatever. You just kind of have a 4-cost card that's not great in its own right, but it's about that setup. It's about that payoff for later. If that's big enough and swinging enough of effect, then it works. And with Calic, certainly would be. I will say, you know, as a like one of legendary, you don't want to necessarily have your deck totally reliant on this card, because there will be games, you know, you just don't hit the Calic. But I think he's enough of a power spike when you do, that if you have a sufficient number of spells in your deck, which certainly Mage has never had a problem with historically, this feels like a really cool payoff. Also keep in mind, any kind of like doubling effects or, you know, duplicating this, start getting extra spell damage on stuff could stack up to be pretty crazy. So that's always something you have to keep in mind. Like, this effect is pretty good on its own, but as you multiply it, like, man, that could be really scary. So that's always a possibility, and makes Archmage Calic, I think, a really interesting threat for Mage decks. So next up here is one of those very spells we were talking about, the Sleet Storm, a 1-mana frost spell. This one deals 2 damage, and then it deals 1 damage to a random enemy minion, which I realize is basically just exactly like the spell we were just looking at, isn't it? It's like it's just like the baby version of that. But I think it's, again, actually really good here. This is kind of fine on its own. Sometimes just, you know, 1 mana deal 2, that can be a little face chip here or there, might help you clean up a little board of just kind of random junk left behind. Beyond that, you know, again, scales really well with Archmage Calic, because this now becomes a deal 3 and also a deal 2. So you know, getting double the bonus there off your Calic, it's a little bit of extra reach face, or again, just a little bit better at dealing, you know, that could then kill like a single 5 health minion on board, deal 3 and deal 2. Or a 3 health and a 2 health little combo there. So nothing, you know, crazy high output here, nothing flashy, nothing fancy, but like a good, honest, workman-like card. And if you're going to have cheap spells in your deck, which so many decks do, because there's so many other ways to pay off cheap spells, that, yeah, I think this seems like a totally fine option and is flexible enough that going face is a nice bonus on this sometimes, whereas other times you're just kind of happy to kill a 2/2 and a 1/1, and that's good enough. But plays well with Calic and otherwise. So if you're dealing a lot of damage with spells, guess what? We've got Spellweaver's Brilliance to pay that off. This is a 10-mana arcane spell. Summon a 6/6 dragon, and it costs 1 less for each damage you dealt with spells this turn. Which, you know, on average, you're going to get multiple damage per mana. I mean, we literally just, you know, we just saw a card that's 3 damage for 1 mana. You play 2 of these, you've got a 6-cost discount on your Spellweaver's Brilliance for only 2 mana. And of course, you can take that even further with stuff like Archmage Calic So you can imagine a scenario where you like go Calic on 4, play a handful of cheap spells on 5. You know, those spells are awesome anyway because they've got extra spell damage and stuff. But then also you get to dump a 6/6 dragon on board for like 1 or 2 or 0 mana because you've done enough damage. Maybe like you know, a single AoE just cleaning things up. You know, you could also imagine a card like Flame Strike, for instance, just hitting a couple things. You've now got Flame Strike plus a 0 mana 6/6 dragon. So it creates some potential swings on board for a high tempo kind of counter development when you're tidying up the board with damage. Probably not as interesting when you're like going face, for instance, because you maybe don't care as much about a 6/6 if you're already turning the corner for face damage. But when taking those swings on board, I think this does become a pretty efficient way to develop. It's just going to be a question of kind of math and where this gets and how quickly it gets to a cheap enough level. For instance, you know, is this a 0 mana 6/6 all the time? And when is it a 0 mana 6/6? Turn 5? That's probably relevant. If it's turn 7 or 8, 0 mana 6/6, still maybe not that interesting. Alternatively, you know, can you get this down on like turn 4 or 5 as maybe a 3 mana 6/6? That might still be relevant, right? So it's just about finding that kind of numerical line where there are moments this feels good. You know, 3 mana 6/6, that's good. Turn 5, maybe a 1 mana 6/6, 2 mana 6/6 might still be relevant as you get later and later. Could be fine to throw a 0 mana 6/6 down, but maybe not as interesting. So I think it's still promising though. Like I could definitely imagine some decks where this just becomes that counter swing on board, and suddenly the opponent's like, man, I lost everything, and now I have to face down a 6/6 or sometimes even 2 6/6s, and they're like, gosh, that was just too big of a swing, and it's really hard to recover from that on turn 5 or whatever. So I do think this card's pretty intriguing. Little bit nervous about the math sometimes, but I do think it'll get there. All right, so next appears the Unstable Spellcaster, 4 mana 2/5 elemental with spell damage +1, and then Battle Cry. If you dealt damage with a spell this turn, summon a copy of this, which that's nice, man. Like 2 5 health bodies, each with spell damage for only 4 mana. That's a pile of annoying stuff that sometimes could also kind of hang around, or maybe the opponent just can't quite deal with both of these. That's really intriguing to me. Now, there is some kind of consideration about how all of this lines up. For instance, you know, this is probably not really a turn 4 play. It actually could be, for the record, thanks to like Stellar Balance, where you get a Moonfire, and then on turn 4, you play the Moonfire, and then you just rip the double Unstable Spellcaster. I mean, I guess that's even possible on turn 3 with a coin, which 2 of these on turn 3 with coin would be nuts into like Calic on turn 4. You'd have so much spell damage lined up already. But anyway, like the sequencing does become a bit of a challenge, because otherwise, you know, maybe this is like a turn 5 play, right? And you play your 1 cost thing we already looked at, and then you play your Unstable Spellcasters. But then what's after that, right? You've got the spell damage on board, but then if you're trying to get these out quickly, then you don't have, you know, any mana left to use the spell damage, so you have to hope they stick. So more realistically, this might be something that you're kind of playing on maybe turn 7, turn 8, where you use some cheap spell to activate it, then you play them, and you hope to have enough damage remaining, or enough mana remaining after that to actually utilize the 2 spell damage that you now have, which you could definitely see that being a turn. Like going into turn 7, you Moonfire face, you play double Unstable Spellcaster. I mean, well, you play 1, but you get 2 of them, right? And then you use like your 1 cost spell we just saw, what's that called? The Sleet Storm, right? And suddenly this is dealing 4. Maybe if you've already played an Archmage Calic earlier, this is now dealing 5. And it's like, man, I get, you know, 1 mana deal 5 a couple times. Maybe another spell works in there too. And it's like suddenly that becomes this really high lethal sort of push. Or again, you know, you could use these as a cleanup tool as well, since this is sometimes hitting random enemy minions or whatever. You know, both of those are possibilities. So is it more of a kind of swingy thing early where you go for almost like the stats and, you know, still value the kind of leftover spell damage you anticipate kind of getting stuck because the opponent couldn't deal with 10 health all at once on turn 3 or 4? Or do you save it for later and use it as kind of a soft combo card? Probably not really an OTK setup of any kind, but, you know, still just like a big swing later. Both of those actually seem kind of possible to me. I don't know that either seems crazy strong necessarily, but I think both seem kind of viable. And if you're running this sort of spell damagey deck that just has all these benefits anyway, then yeah, Unstable Spellcaster seems like it could fit in there. I mean, ultimately, you know, just 410 in stats with spell damage to boot. Like that's definitely going to be annoying for opponents to deal with. So next up here is the Rain Caller, a 2-mana 1/4 elemental. It reads, the first time you deal damage with a spell each turn, gain +2 attack. So another way here to pay off your damage dealing spells. 4 health here on the 2-drop is pretty nice. Like that's, you know, that's sticky enough that I think very often this could be kind of a 3/4 attacking on turn 3. Do keep in mind, you know, this is not each time you deal damage with a spell, so you're not going to like instantly push this to a 5/4, 7/4 or something on turn 3 with sneaky plays. It's going to get stuck as a 3/4 on turn 3 if you played this on turn 2 without any additional support. So, you know, that's really my hesitation with this card, is that only 2 damage per turn scaling doesn't really feel like it's going to make this threatening enough, fast enough to be what I would want out of it in the deck. And also, you know, like at some point your deck is kind of competing between all of these minions and payoffs, but also you need enough spells that are dealing damage. Where's the tipping point there? I could see this card actually getting cut a little bit in that tipping point. Now that said, we are still post rotation, small card pools. You just need stuff to play. And you know, a 2-mana 3/4 basically, which is what I think this will often be, might just be the stuff to play. Do keep in mind too, though, that the turn you play this, it is often going to be a 1/4 when you play it on turn 2, and you're not usually going to want to have a spell that's played the same turn, or you're not going to want to wait until turn 3 or whatever necessarily. So it does kind of give the opponent an ability to trade into this really easily. You know, if they had like a 2/2 on board, they get to soften this up a turn early, use a weapon or whatever without taking as much return damage, which is, again, kind of a liability. It's a notable downside for this guy. So between the kind of lack of acceleration that this has, some of that downside risk that's baked into the delay of this card, and maybe just deck building constraints, this is looking like it's going to be at the very bottom of the list as far as I'm concerned. Like this might be, you know, card 27, 28, 29, 30 range, which makes it playable perhaps, but just really, I think, a quick cut, and certainly not the reason I'm kind of excited about a mage deck that's you know, combining all this stuff. So now we're going to move on over to Hunter. This is the Stone Talon Striker, a 3-mana 3/3 taunt that reads, while in hand, play a dragon to become a 6/6 dragon, which that means this is a 3-mana 6/6 dragon with taunt that is, I think, incredibly easy to activate. Just play a 1 or 2 cost dragon in your Dragon Hunter deck, and you've got a 3-mana 6/6 taunt, which is great. Keep in mind, we are seeing an entire kind of little cycle of dragon cards here for Hunter. We saw Abyssian earlier, like on day 1. Don't forget this guy, 7-mana 6/6. Battlecry, your dragons have rush this game. While in hand, play a dragon to become a 12/12 dragon. So there's this kind of mid-rangey dragon hunter thing. We're going to see even more cards in this video to support as well. That looks really good to me. You know, I was a little worried this might be happening too late. With cards like this, you kind of imagine you're going to be able to get to turn 7 successfully, if that is, you haven't already overwhelmed the opponent with all of your 3-mana 6/6s. In a way, you might be getting to turn 7 so successfully that you don't actually need Abyssian. You might just be winning off of the crazy mid-range push that's happening on like turn 3, 4, 5, as opposed to maybe like turn 7, 8 or whatever. So that is interesting. It's almost like this card is too good too early, that it makes me want to shift this deck in a more aggressive fashion. Can you run like a Dragon Hunter where this is the star of the show, and you know, maybe you're not even worried about getting to Abyssian, you want to peek out on turn 5 or 6 or something and just be killing the opponent with some awesome mid-range bodies? I think we're going to see another card that kind of supports that as well. So in other words, like, I like this package. I think it's really cool. I see this as a very, very powerful standout card. I almost wonder if it's so good that it makes the legendary for this deck not as good. Like, do you need Abyssian? Because not only is this a 7-cost card, it's one that kind of pays off even later than that, right? It's paying off your turn 8, turn 9, turn 10 or whatever with this rush upside. So this is actually the star of the show as far as I'm concerned. I think this card looks really good. A 6/6 on turn 3 is very big, very aggressive, and not at all hard to activate here as far as I'm concerned. So I think this will have some blowouts, honestly, quite quickly. We've already seen some cheap dragon action as well, so we know there's going to be bodies to throw in early for this striker, and that makes this card very, very strong. So next up here is the Ebon Scale Scout. This is another one in the same vein, a 6-mana 4/4 with Battle Cry. Deal damage equal to this minion's attack. While in hand, play a dragon to become an 8/8 dragon. So I want to be clear with you, that is then an 8/8 that deals 8 damage, and it can go face. It does not need to hit minions. It just says deal damage equal to. So what I'm getting at again, right, is you're playing this insane 3-mana 6/6 on turn 3. You're whacking the opponent with giant bodies in the mid game. Then you've got your Ebon Scale Scout, which is going to be this incredible finisher. It's an 8/8 that deals 8 to face. Like, if that doesn't kill them outright, you know, it's still presenting a threat on board alongside, you know, all the other threats they've been dealing with the entire game. You know, you might have 2 of these, another one ready to go next turn. You've got a hero power. It's like, good God, dude, this is the lethal push. Again, why do I need Abyssian? I'm winning the game on turn 6, right? This card again looks crazy strong to me. Didn't we have like an Alexstrasza that like dealt 8 damage or something, and it was like a pretty good card? Am I losing my mind? Which Alexstrasza was that, dude? Didn't we have? Yeah, like this was played. I want to be clear. This was played for 9 mana, and you were happy when it dealt 8, right? You liked playing this as a 9 mana 8/8 that dealt 8 damage. This is a 6 mana 8/8 that deals 8 damage. Yeah, of course, those are different eras, right? But I'm saying for 3 mana less, this is a strong card, dude. I mean, this is kind of like that Warrior Dragon 2, kind of a mid-game, you know, damage push that has some armor gain, but this deals even more damage. So this looks very, very good to me, but they're also making me hesitate with Abyssian. Like, can this deck even go to Abyssian? Does it need to be faster? I don't know, but both of these cards look very strong. So interestingly, another piece of the Dragon Hunter puzzle here, this is a 1-mana spell, Earthen Roar. This sets an enemy minion's health to 1, and then if you're holding a dragon, you get to pick another. So basically, set a couple dudes down to 1 health here, you know, equality light. That's a pretty powerful effect for 1 mana. Like in a vacuum, you know, that does a thing you like. It's efficient. I will say, I wonder, like, do you want to use this? Like, Hunter does obviously have a lot of tools historically as well that are great at dealing 1 damage. That's little 1/1 rushers sometimes. That's like spells, you know, Wound Prey or whatever. A lot of things, cards that even combine those 2 things together, right? A lot of things do line up well with this in Hunter, I will say. So I don't want to write this off, but I will say too, like, if you're running a dragon deck, which you're probably going to want to do for this, I don't know if you really need this card. I don't know how often you plan to be dealing with your opponent's stuff as opposed to presenting your own threats. The cards I'm seeing right now are much better at like presenting the threat and putting the opponent on the back foot, forcing them to trade. I don't know how many cards in your deck you're going to want to slot in that do the opposite and go the other direction. I think you might just want to lean into the pressure that I expect a mid-range Dragon Hunter deck would provide. So, you know, again, it might just be one of those where it's, hey, we got post-rotation, I just need cards, I'm going to slot this in, it's fine, I don't always use it, it's not exactly perfect for my deck, but what else am I going to utilize? Maybe, that's fine for this card. And again, like, just speaking without context, you know, a lot of this does make sense, so you don't write it off ever, but I also could see Dragon decks kind of leaving this one behind pretty quickly because they're just doing their own thing, and this doesn't necessarily lean into that game plan. So next up here is Confront the Tol'vir, moving a little bit of a different direction. 3-mana spell. This replays each 1-cost card you've played this game, targeting enemies if possible. So if you have spells that, you know, deal damage, for instance, like a Wound Prey, those are going to target enemies. And if you have minions, by the way, they're just going to get, like, replayed. This is not just spells, it's cards, which actually makes this card kind of nuts to me. Like, for only 3 mana, you could get a lot of upside out of this card, right? Like, I was just looking at, like, you know, 1 mana minions in Hunter. Like, this alone feeds into your Confront the Tol'vir in a giant way, right? Like, this is, you know, turn 1, turn 2, you've already got you know, 2 more 1-cost things to play. You could theoretically play your Confront the Tol'vir on 3 and make it a decent play. Like, you'd get, you know, 3 mana worth of stuff already out of 1 card. I don't think that's really how you want to use this, but you could. I think realistically you want to wait and save this up till later, and you know, maybe at some point it's like turn 5 or 6, you might get a full board of minions and some spells that start interacting with the opponent's stuff, little chunks of removal, a little face damage here and there or whatever. Isn't it worth it to play like a 3-cost card that gives you 5 or 6 1-drops on board? Of course, there are some questions about deck building there, like how many 1-drops can a deck actually run? But if you're generating them, like we just saw with that card, you don't have to commit as many deck slots to it. So this doesn't feel as like big of a risk where you're kind of running out of mana or stuff and just hoping Tol'vir's enough. It might just slot in as sort of a freebie big swing card for only 3 mana. So, you know, I don't know exactly what the deck list looks like, and I don't know exactly, you know, which 1-drops are going to feel like the biggest payoffs, but they may not even exist right now. This is one of those like, maybe it doesn't come together yet, but as card pools increase, as card quality increases, you know, suddenly you could get a big old stack of 1-cost things that make some big time plays off Confront the Tol'vir. If you get any value generation or card draw mixed in too, it doesn't even matter if your deck's running that light, because you're going to get to like replay some of that card draw or card generation. And it's like, man, I think this card just does a lot effectively for 3 mana. It's not going to be hard to get 6-7 mana worth of stuff out of this at a pretty reasonable pace in a given game. And I think that makes this quite strong potentially. Moving on here to the Tol'vir Carver. This is a 3 mana 3/2 with Battlecry. Choose a card in your hand. At the start of your turns, reduce its cost by 1. So basically here, probably the goal is have a pretty big thing, and you play this on turn 3, and you hope to discount that big thing and make it, you know, playable at a reasonable time frame. So, you know, it might be a sweet spot basically for, say, a 7-cost card where you play this on turn 3. On turn 4, that 7-cost card goes to 6, and then on turn 5, that 7-cost card goes down to 5, making it a good, clean play on turn 5. You know, Abyssian could be an example there. I probably want to play my 6/6 on turn 3 instead of a Tol'vir Carver, but definitely a possibility. A 12/12 Abyssian on turn 5 that gives all your dragons rush, that's still a fantastic play. Like, that could absolutely work well in a dragon deck. And of course, there are going to be other examples. Colossal, for instance, could be a different example as well, where you just want to discount your Colossal. Isn't that also 7 cost in Hunter? Maybe 6, I forget. But you know, I think basically you're going to have decks that this does line up pretty well. It's just, number one, a question, is that card in hand? Are there enough options in hand where maybe you kind of always have something that you're happy to hit? Could you even just like hit 5-drops and play it on turn 4? Like, really good 5-drops might actually make the Tol'vir Carver worth it in that scenario. So I do think this card's intriguing. Certainly we know cheating out big stuff, particularly that has long-term impacts, getting that down sooner can absolutely swing games in a big way. So yeah, I think this card's pretty good. Next up here is the Reinforcement Rallier. This is a 1 mana 2/2 with Elusive, which refreshing to see a card like this. It's a pretty simple, basic card for this era of Hearthstone. Is it good? I don't know. I think a lot of people's instincts will say this is a good card. It's hard to say you're wrong, but at the same time, I don't know if a card like this has kept up with modern day Hearthstone. There were definitely eras where just slamming a 2/2 on 1 felt good. The Elusive here is certainly a nice bonus on top of that, makes it kind of awkward to deal with. I will say there are some downsides too. Hunter is a class that has had some minion buffs in the past. You wouldn't be able to buff this if you ever got like a minion buff deck. So, you know, that's kind of a downside, but generally, of course, this is a beneficial effect. Makes it harder for spells to interact with your Rallier. I guess the question for me is just like, does this find a deck? Because you could easily see this getting left behind. If this were a dragon, I'd be like, yes, A+, perfect dragon for my mid-range dragon deck that's slightly more aggressive, right? I'd say 100% lock it in. But just as it stands, for instance, like, could a dragon deck run this? Probably not, right? Does a beast deck run this? Probably not, right? They probably have just a more specialized 1-drop that's fulfilling some need that this doesn't really fulfill. So it's just like, I think it's fine, but I also could see this just falling in the gaps where no deck really needs this, just because there's a lot of good 1-drops to choose from. So all that said, let's go ahead and rate these cards from 1 to 5 stars. Archmage Calic is a 4-star card. Sleet Storm is a 4-star card. Spellweaver's Brilliance is a 4-star card. Unstable Spellcaster is a 4-star card. Raincaller is a 3-star card. Stone Talon Striker is a 5-star card. Ebon Scale Scout is a 4-star card. Earthen Roar is a 3-star card. Confront the Tolvir is a 4-star card. Tolvir Carver is a 4-star card. Reinforcement Rallier is a 2-star card. And yeah, there you go, man. That is a really strong review. Those were some incredibly high scores. I don't know if I've ever had a single review with like that many 4s. I honestly thought about giving Ebon Scale Scout a 5-star as well, but I think this is actually a more decisive card on turn 3. This will like look flashier and seal a lot of games maybe, but this one might be the more important part of it, I think, at the end of the day. So yeah, I like these a lot. Maybe the Mage stuff, I kind of noodled with like 3 stars for Spellweaver's Brilliance, but I think it all lines up, man. I think it's pretty cool. So share your thoughts on these cards down below. Thanks much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.